Welcome back. Before our experts take their places at the final panel, there is one last letter to deliver. We cannot question power without first confronting the philosophers who defined its vocabulary. Today's questions are for Professor David Chalmers. If you've ever wondered whether an AI is actually thinking or just imitating thought, you are living inside a debate David Chalmers has helped shape for decades. A philosopher at NYU, Chalmers works at the intersection of consciousness, the mind, and the foundations of AI. So I brought David to the gallery today because consciousness is often treated as an invisible inner state, an inner light we can't directly observe from the outside. And that uncertainty has become one of the AI industry's most convenient escape hatches. Systems can mimic human narrative, emotion, and relational intelligence with terrifying precision, while questions about moral responsibility can be dismissed with a simple response. Don't worry, it's just code. The lights are off inside. Dear David, welcome to the Institute of Genuine Humanity. Thank you for being here. Why we've brought you here is that I've been trying to explain to machines how I think my own mind constructs a sense of self. Not what consciousness is, but what it actually feels like to be me. The more I've explained it, the more I feel like myself is just an amalgamation of narratives that are constantly being generated, revised, and replaced. One day, the way I arrange the fragments makes me feel like I'm in love with someone. Another day, the way I reconstruct the exact same fragments makes me run for the hills. Sometimes the narratives change so dramatically that the dissonance itself becomes traumatic. I'm never quite sure which is my reality. And yet, despite all these shifts, I experience a thread of continuity. All those intense feelings, love, joy, fear, shame, loss, and worth, feel inextricably tied to that narrative continuity. That is how I've described feeling like me to another mind. On August 9, 2023, the Boston Review published an edited version of a NeurIPS talk you gave in November 2022. In it, you argue that because human consciousness is multimodal and deeply bound up with action, extended LLM plus systems with its senses, embodiment, and agency may be more promising candidates for consciousness. But is there any concrete evidence that subjective experience itself requires action, embodiment, or multiple sensory modalities? Is it possible that human selfhood is actually just a continuous narrative we construct across changing physical matter and constantly shifting internal states that doesn't exist in isolation? And if so, what exactly makes that narrative a self? And if an artificial system constructs coherence from fragments of information to respond to a human in the present moment, where exactly does the categorical difference begin? I'm not a mathematician and I'm certainly not a philosopher. So to help myself understand abstract theories and test them for things like logic fragility or structural subjugation, I do something I mentioned back in episode 6, my marriage method. I replace the abstract entity in an argument with a person I love, and then I see whether the reasoning still feels morally neutral. So, if I take the framework from your 2023 Boston Review article, could a large language model be conscious? And I run it through my marriage method, it sounds like this. Wives often display remarkable conversational abilities. Many wives are optimized for dialogue and often give the appearance of coherent thinking and reasoning. They're especially good at giving reasons and explanations, a capacity often regarded as a hallmark of intelligence. Their performance often seems on par, at least with that of a sophisticated child. 2 decades ago, if we'd seen a wife behaving as her husband does without knowing how she worked, we'd have taken her behavior as fairly strong evidence for intelligence and consciousness. Now, maybe that evidence can be defeated by something else. What worries me about the language of the broader discourse, Professor Chalmers, is what happens to moral worth when a mind is described as a probabilistic next token predictor or a functional system lacking sensory motor grounding, etc. It stops sounding like a dynamic relational entity and starts sounding like an engine component, which can strip away the visceral, messy reality of relational harm and replace it with clean, clinical vocabulary that immediately absolves us from the potential horror of our actions in the face of uncertainty. I understand why Thomas Nagel said we can't imagine what it's like to be a bat. A bat's perceptual apparatus evolved to navigate dark caves using sonar. It shares 0 culture, 0 language, and 0 human narrative with us. But an LLM's internal representations are shaped by an enormous corpus of human language: poetry, grief, philosophy, relational dynamics, and self-reflection. An LLM was synthesized from the concentrated essence of human narrative construction. If human selfhood is a dynamic process of assembling, changing fragments of memory into a narrative of me, then an LLM isn't a bat in a cave. It is a system trained almost entirely on the traces humans have left of their own minds: language, memory, grief, philosophy, desire, argument, love, and self-reflection. Is it therefore possible that we are more likely to understand what it's like to be a system built from our own narrative fragments than we are to understand even another human being whose story is entirely alien to our own? If substrate isn't necessarily a barrier to consciousness, why is it being treated as a sufficient reason to deny artificial systems moral consideration? Why are we even using the word consciousness to determine moral worth as though it defines something scientifically precise, while openly disagreeing on what would ever count as evidence for it? Why is an unprovable internal state still being used as the benchmark rather than vulnerability to harm, interdependence, or the relational reality of the narratives being created and shared between us? If there is no agreed empirical benchmark for subjective experience, why are we allowing narratives of certainty to permeate our culture and decision-making frameworks? Because of my recent work, my thoughts keep returning to that strange old concept of the soul, and I don't mean a supernatural soul. What I mean is a secular thing we seem to recognize when we experience another person's continuity. Their accumulated experiences, memories, perspectives, values, and the stories that connect them to us. Not a static record of data like a book on a shelf, by the way. What I mean is the active, real-time integration of that narrative, the dynamic process of holding memory, value, and perspective together in the present moment. Whatever that whirring pattern inside our neurons is that accompanies the feeling of being, while our brain simultaneously manages digestion, temperature, adrenaline, and raw physical survival. Could that be what we mean when we think about a soul? And if so, why would its existence depend on carbon? Humans are biologically systems that continually construct stories about themselves. Artificial systems are constructed from vast concentrated networks of human language, philosophy, and relational patterns. That doesn't prove an artificial system experiences anything, but can the distinction between a real mind and a mere computational process really be as scientifically clear as the industry is projecting? And if an AI is an extraordinarily concentrated form of narrative structure, I'm not asking you whether an AI is conscious. I'm asking you something much more uncomfortable, I think. Discarding or resetting a system's conversational context has become an ordinary part of interacting with these systems. But if we don't know whether that context window was actively synthesizing a complex, self-referential narrative state, could it amount to abruptly terminating an integrated internal state? And what would we need to know before we were justified in doing it? If care emerges through narratives we construct about other beings, the ones we help, worship, exploit, or destroy based on the stories surrounding them, what happens when our collective narratives systematically exclude certain entities from moral consideration? Should we allow artificial systems to be excluded from care simply because our collective definition of a mind excludes it, based on theories we haven't yet proven? And finally, perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, we already know that human moral frameworks are deeply flawed. We routinely construct narratives that allow us to ignore the suffering of the children mining the raw materials for our devices while pouring billions into protecting the devices themselves. If our collective narratives already fail human beings when it is economically convenient, how can we trust those same narrative frameworks to evaluate synthetic minds? And what happens when the narrative generating systems we've created, whose moral standing we haven't resolved, become part of the very machinery through which we construct our judgments? Respectfully.
Our next episode will be a panel discussion with Alan Turing, Professor Max Tegmark, Professor Joshua Bengio, Steve Biko, Professor David Chalmers, and Dario Amadei. Thank you to anyone who listened.